Is one Denver Bronco in particular being massively undervalued ahead of the 2025 season with training camp right around the corner? Does Sean Payton need to prioritize a contract extension for one of Colorado's more tenured veterans? And boy, those Denver Nuggets, have they found themselves in a position where it can rightfully be said that they won NBA free agency after a wild 24-hour flurry of moves, extensions, trades, and signings? All things to come on today's rundown. Happy July 3rd to you all. We will begin in the world of the NBA, where, boy, those Denver Nuggets, the new front office regime, co-executive vice presidents John Wallace and Ben Tenzer, player personnel, basketball operations, working seamlessly in perfect synergy to create one of the more exciting 24-hour periods in a Nuggets offseason in recent memory. Kicked things off with the blockbuster trade of Michael Porter Jr. to the Brooklyn Nets, along with a 2032 first-round pick to bring in Cam Johnson as a new member of the new look Nuggets. And the moves didn't stop there. They brought back Bruce Brown on a vet minimum contract. You see Jonas Valanciunas coming in as a backup five, a backup big man, maybe the best backup big since Mason Plumlee, Plum Dog, was here in town, comes over from the Sacramento Kings. And then Tim Hardaway Jr., veteran, sharpshooter, comes over to the Denver Nuggets, giving Jokic and Jamal and AG and David Adelman, most importantly, sharpshooting, floor spacing, three-point options on the court. And then you look at the departures. Russell Westbrook declines his player option, Michael Porter Jr. in the aforementioned Cam Johnson trade, and Dario Saric, arguably the worst contract situation on the Nuggets roster right now, as he opted into his north of $5 million player option. And he gets shipped to Sacramento in a straight-up player-for-player swap. Jonas Valanciunas in, Dario Saric out. That's quite a depth chart and a ledger of moves for the new co-executive VPs in the Nuggets front office. I raised my hand the last couple of days and said, you know what? I may have been a little too quick to judge. As Ted Lasso would say, I was judgmental and not curious about how this new regime would make their mark and their footprint, starting in their first couple of weeks on the job with an NBA free agency period that is going to prove to be pivotal in keeping the Nuggets in Western Conference and NBA Finals contention. Let's start with the MPJ Cam Johnson trade, which we have talked about at length over the last couple of days. But again, I just don't think it can be understated that this move, when you're slicing off a member of your core four, if you're the Nuggets, the same way that the Avalanche sliced off Mikko Rantanen, the logic behind Chris McFarland's decision to trade Mikko Rantanen was to take what would have been more of an albatross-sized contract, paying Mikko north of $12 million per year, and turn that into multiple players for the same amount of money that you can spread depth throughout the top six, through your middle six, and into your bottom six. They did that with Marty Necas, who was your player-for-player Mikko replacement. You got Jack Drury and some draft capital. You used that to turn around and flip trades for Brock Nelson and Ryan Lindgren and Charlie Coyle. And you were able to retool, after your goalie room, a pretty significant roster overhaul. For Ben Tenzer and John Wallace, bringing Cam Johnson over from the Brooklyn Nets, who also spent time previously with the Phoenix Suns, right near the Nuggets' backyard, a box score might tell you that you're getting the same player, and there's maybe some evidence to that. If you look at the shot charts for Michael Porter Jr. and Cam Johnson over this past season, they're basically identical looking to a naked eye. You can see, statistically speaking, they are pretty similar in points. They have 18.2 to 18.8, so a slight edge to Cam Johnson there. About the same amount of three-pointers per game, which is obviously something the Nuggets need desperately is more volume, not just conversions, but volume in the three-point shooting department. An edge to Cam Johnson there. Virtual identical three-point shooting percentage. MPJ has a pretty sizable advantage in the rebounding department, not as much of a facet of Cam Johnson's game. And assists per game advantage Cam. So a box score might tell you, as would their shot chart in terms of where they're spacing the floor. Taking a look at those two pictures side by side, you can tell they have similar offensive, from a shooting standpoint, styles, but it's deeper than that. And even if they do find themselves to be identical, which we're going to go more in depth on tomorrow on our 4th of July show, you're paying half as much for Cam Johnson as you were Michael Porter Jr. Michael Porter Jr. was going to be due north of $38 million on his contract that would go through the 2026-2027 season. Cam Johnson, right north of $21 million. So you save about $17 million in that regard. Then you turn around and you're able to make maneuvers. You open yourself up to a non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which juices more money into the options you can spend while staying under those pesky CBA thresholds with the first apron luxury tax and second apron. And then you take the albatross of a Dario Saric contract and you get off of it entirely, taking on double the money without having to match, because in either of these cases without having to match, because both Brooklyn and Sacramento have cap situations that allowed you to do so. Brooklyn needed to fill money to spend to keep their cap situation where they want it. So they take on a larger contract, like Michael Porter Jr.'s. Sacramento needs cap relief to try to bring in moves without slicing off members of their team that they want to keep in town. And therefore, they take on your bad $5.2 million player option contract for Dario Saric and give you a $10 million or so contract in Jonas Valanciunas. Jonas is 10, worth significantly more, in my opinion, than Dario Saric's 5, considering Saric could barely fight to get on the court under the previous regime. And I don't expect that to change, just as it didn't when Adelman took over, albeit for 3 games of a regular season. I don't expect that, or didn't expect that to change going forward, and that is why he finds himself in Sacramento. But these Denver Nuggets, with their flurry of moves, and in theory, there's a couple of roster spots still open. They could probably use a backup point guard of more ilk to speak of, another veteran potential presence there, and another roster spot to be able to maybe look at some wing options or have some flexibility in their front court. But I will say this. The Denver Nuggets, with these flurry of moves that they've made, the acquisitions of Cam Johnson and Bruce Brown and Jonas Valanciunas and Tim Hardaway, have put them, in my opinion, firmly back into the contention for an NBA Finals run and potentially an NBA Finals win, bringing home their second Larry O'Brien trophy in franchise history. And it is not just the view with blue and yellow colored glasses here locally that might cloud that vision. The Denver Nuggets, from a national perspective, from the likes of Bill Simmons and whatever national talking heads on TV that you want to bring out, the Brian Windhorsts of the world, the Zach Lowe's of the world, they have attacked free agency with a level of aggression that, one, I just don't think many of us here in town thought was possible because of the way that Calvin Booth and the previous regime handled things and the discourse between he and Michael Malone. In less than 24 hours, this new upstart, young, hungry front office duo of Ben Tenzer and John Wallace has completely reversed that narrative to where, if I'm Calvin Booth, just to be frank, I'm drawing the shades, I'm throwing that phone on Do Not Disturb, and I'm laying low for a little bit, because the new kids on the block made what Calvin Booth was either unable or unwilling, and I do think unwilling could be the rationale, was unable or unwilling to do. And secondary to that, if I'm Michael Malone, who is watching from afar after being let go as the winningest coach in the history of the Denver Nuggets franchise, and as of now does not have a new job in the hiring cycle in the NBA. I'm watching what Ben Tenzer and John Wallace have done with just this mix of dismay and disbelief and disgust and frustration, because what Tenzer and Wallace have done is to a T what Michael Malone was asking for, what he was begging for ever since they won the title in the 2022-2023 season. You get off of a bad contract to bring a better shooter, and if not a better shooter, an equal shooter who's better with the ball in his hands and better on the defensive end of the court in Cam Johnson. You bring back Bruce Brown, who Michael Malone was drunkenly campaigning for on the steps of the Capitol after the championship parade with the Bruce and everything that he was saying. He was basically campaigning in front of a microphone for Kroenke and Calvin Booth and company to bring back a role player that he knew was pivotal in the chemistry and the makeup of the team and allowing them to have quality playoff bench rotational help. Calvin Booth does not, lets him go to the Indiana Pacers, chases the bag, and then goes through a washing machine. And now Tenzer and Wallace bring him back. And then you bring in Jonas Valanciunas, somebody who may or may not necessarily be a part of a playoff rotation, but at a minimum would allow Jokic to spell for 4 to 7 more minutes during a game, 4 to 5 more minutes during a game over the course of an 82-game regular season, and be more fresh for the postseason when it's going to be relied upon of him to carry that load again. And then Tim Hardaway, a player who can absolutely shoot from beyond the arc. He hit 63%, Tim Hardaway did, of his open three-point shots during this previous 2024-2025 campaign. 63% of his open three-point jump shots? Man, can you think back to all the moments where this Nuggets team would have been begging and craving that kind of production and what we thought we would be getting from Michael Porter Jr. But this was the Justin Holiday and the Bruce Brown and the KCP additions that Michael Malone utilized and was so fond of that went away after the title year. And Michael Malone gets fired with 3 games left to go in the regular season. And then the very next offseason, the new GM tenure, their tandem, gives the new head coach, David Adelman, everything Michael Malone would have wanted. Whew, man, it cannot taste good. It could not be fun. It could not be easy for Michael Malone to witness what the Denver Nuggets have done over the last 24 to 48 hours and how differently the ending of his tenure could have been if Calvin Booth and or Ben Tenzer and John Wallace could have done that for him, how differently things may have looked. In the world of the NFL, I want to ask a question, just out of curiosity, about one particular member of the Denver Broncos, and that is their veteran wide receiver 1, Courtland Sutton. And that question is this: are we undervaluing what Courtland Sutton brings to the table? Because I think, given the way that his contract situation last season went, when he was posting gifs on social media of Will Smith in the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air standing in an empty living room with all of his friends and having to have questions about whether or not he's going to show up to mandatory minicamp and training camp during offseason programming, and they end up cashing him and juicing him with incentives into his contract, which he hits and because of the success and the development and growth of Bo Nix. And then now we're back in the same situation this offseason where Courtland Sutton's going to want more money. He is among these reaching that aging wide receiver kind of tier where you're not sure you want to juice that much money into a guy whose production predictably could be more on the decline than it is still on the rise. And I think there's a growing sentiment or general concept within the fan base, at least in whispers, that maybe it's fine if the Broncos just let Courtland Sutton walk and you move forward and you turn directions and you brought in Pat Bryant, and maybe if you were more focused on it, you'd have drafted a wide receiver earlier than the 3rd round. But I just want to ask the question about whether or not we are kind of letting ourselves or fall into sleeping on or undervaluing what Courtland Sutton brings to this offense. His statistics in 2024 alone would show you that he's a productive and reputable wide receiver at the NFL level. He just under 1,100 yards on 81 touchdowns. He was targeted 130-something times, 135 times with 8 touchdowns. Last 2 seasons ago with Russell Wilson at quarterback, he caught 10 touchdowns, which was a significantly high number for him. Not that long ago or early in Courtland Sutton's career, just before COVID, Courtland Sutton had a 1,000-yard season, 1,100-yard season with 3 different starting quarterbacks when the carousel was firmly in motion here in Denver at the quarterback position. And he's proven to be a wide receiver that, even though you can look and say, hey, maybe he's not Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, maybe he's not a wide receiver 1 for a third of the teams in the NFL, or a number, that you want to parcel out. And maybe that's true. But he's the wide receiver 1 here in Denver. And it's not particularly close, in my opinion. When you look at the wide receiver 2 options behind Courtland Sutton, one, as we've discussed on this show and kind of throughout the offseason, we don't actually know who the number 2 wide receiver is for the Broncos right now. Is it Marvin Mims? Is it going to be Devon Vele? Is Troy Franklin going to take a massive leap? Is Evan Ingram going to put up wide receiver 2-like production in his joker role, despite the fact that he's a tight end by position? Is Pat Bryant going to be somebody that kind of plucks opportunity out of a room that doesn't really have a clear-cut favorite to emerge at that position? We don't know. And so the fact that we have a wide receiver 1 who you can say maybe isn't an elite top-tier wide receiver 1, and that's fair and that's valid, the wide receiver 2 position is so far below that wide receiver 1 level that Courtland Sutton is at, that it's not just as simple as, hey, maybe we'd be fine if we let Courtland Sutton walk. I actually think this should be a priority, and I didn't always feel this way this year. I think this is something that's kind of grown on me the more that you look at the roster and you kind of look at the landscape of things. And I've reevaluated and rethought it under the lens of this. I don't want anything to stand in the way of the development of Bo Nix, who I believe is the next franchise quarterback for the Denver Broncos. I don't want anything to stand in the way of his sophomore season, year 2 in the NFL, of that being a step forward and a progression and not a tread water or a regression. And if that means locking down the wide receiver 1 in Denver, whether he's a wide receiver 1 everywhere else, doesn't matter to me. He is the wide receiver 1 in Denver, and the options behind him are lacking to enough of a degree that I think that Sean Payton and George Payton and company should prioritize trying to work out a deal with Sutton to lock down Bo Nix's favorite target for a couple more years. You can then evaluate in the draft and in free agency over the next couple of seasons what you might want to do there. Give him a little bit of a bump in pay. It's probably not going to stand in the way of a Zach Allen or a Nick Bonito extension by any means. And don't let that be the reason why Bo Nix, as he looks to grow and progress in the NFL, finds himself struggling to find quality, reliable targets to move the ball down the field. So are we sleeping or undervaluing Courtland Sutton? Potentially. My hope is that we can work something out with Sutton during the summer, in the next couple of weeks before training camp, avoid any kind of drama, avoid any kind of uncertainty or awkwardness or tension, and keep the ball and the eyes focused on Bo Nix as he continues to develop into what we hope is a franchise quarterback, the next in line here in Denver. Thank you all so much for joining us today. The holiday weekend is upon us. We are just one day away from the 4th of July. Happy early Independence Day weekend to you all. We'll catch you at the same time in the same place tomorrow.